Hello, this is Yummy Pajama Man, and today we're going to learn file input and output for today. So, as you can see on the screen, the source code for writing string to the file. So you can write that down in your own source code. So I'll wait. Okay, so you're done. So continuing on. I'm actually going to start off with this tutorial. I'm going to start with explaining the concept of file input and output. The source code actually just only shows how to output string to the file. But today I will just focus on the concept of file input and output, and then I will discuss what you see on the screen for the source code. So continuing on, when the program runs, you've been running programs a lot before, so you know what I mean by running the program. When you say run module, this module right here, it runs the program. And whatever source code you use to run, and it's running right then and there, what happened is the data that you put on the source code is stored in RAM. And what RAM is, the acronym RAM states random access memory. So that data that you're running, for example, if we were to run all this data, like if I put in a print statement, it will go into RAM on your computer. So RAM is just analogous to short-term memory for the computer. And then the hard drive, by contrast, is a long-term memory for the computer. You can store data in the hard drive and it's there forever. If you store data on the RAM, which is what happens whenever you run a program, it doesn't have to be Python, it can be any other program on the computer that you are running, like an application that you can see around my computer. If I were to run this, if I run a notepad, the data that is stored on starting up the notepad and doing whatever you want to do with it, all that data that's associated with maintaining Notepad is on RAM. So if you were to run this, all this data that it needs to know is on RAM. So until when the program stops running, so if this source code stops running or any other application stops running and you get out of the application, then all that data that's in RAM or in short-term memory is gone. It's completely gone. So all the source code that we've been working with before, we've been running the program and then obviously stopping the program. When you stop the program, it's no longer in RAM anymore, and you don't have that permanent data that's occurring when you run the source code, because once it's done, it's completely gone. So here today I just want to show you how you can send data, or you can retain data even after a program stops running. So yeah, that's RAM, random access memory, short-term memory for the computer. So in order to retain data, it must be stored permanently on a hard disk drive, or it can be on a solid state drive. A solid state drive is like a flash drive. So think of a USB except bigger, and it's flash, so it flashes the memory in order to update the memory. Just like a hard drive, except it's flashing. That's where you get the term flash drive, or solid state drive, or any other flash drives in general, like USB, thumb drive, wherever you can store the data permanently. So when the file is used by program, the program must open, process, then close the file. So if we look at the source code, you can see the open built-in function. So what I'm doing is I'm opening the file names.txt, and then after opening it and associating with this open function returns a file object, and then that file object is assigned to the variable name outfile, and then down here I write the string as a process. So what I'm doing is I'm processing or writing the string to the file, and then finally I'm closing the file. So the integrity of writing or processing with a file is the is the open. So you open the file, always open the file when you're working with a file. Do some sort of process. You can write, read, do any other kinds of functions to do a certain process to the file, and then after you're done working with the file, you close it. So it's open, process, and then close. So don't worry about the source code. I'll get into that in a little bit, so don't worry about it. So opening an output file creates a file on disk if file does not exist. So if I open a file for output in general, just don't worry about the source code, but if I were to open the file for output, then let's say if I open a file named names.txt, if that file names.txt is in the same directory, I would overwrite it in this case. Okay. Unless the file doesn't exist. If it doesn't exist and I specify the file name and the extension, then it'll create the file name extension here, right, in the directory if it doesn't exist. If this does exist under the directory, it overwrites it, okay, when you're outputting to a file. So that's outputting to a file. Opening an input file, you open a file that does exist, but you only read data from the input file. Allows the program to read data from the file. So that's what I said. So you have output to a file and then input from a file. The open function creates a file object and associates it with a file on a disk. So as I said before, the open function here creates a file object. So what you're passing into this function is this two arguments, which are strings. So string, and then passing it to the built-in open function, the built-in function that's within Python. And the open function, built-in function, returns a file object, and then that file object that's returned from the open function is referenced by the name outfile. Let's see, associated with a file on a disk. So that's what I said. Modes for opening file. The three modes for opening a file. Over here, this specifies a mode for opening a file. I'm using the write mode, or the W mode. So the second argument after the first argument represents the file that you want to open, and then the second argument represents the mode in which you are opening the file. So I'm opening it in write mode. You can also open it in read mode, which is R. So I put in R for read, or you can put in A for append. So those are the three most common three most common file modes that are used in order to process a file. So WRA. Write, read, append. And what append means is to add on to the file. So append, add on, don't overwrite it, but add on to the file. And those are the three common modes. There are other modes as well, but that's way beyond what I'm going to talk about. So the file names.txt is created where the source code is located unless you specify a path. So here I specified a path. So I said from my K drive, so starting with the double quotes and then the double quotes, which means this is a string, right? A string. Starting with the K drive, which is my drive letter, or whichever drive letter you're wanting to specify, you can do the C drive instead. So C colon, I start with K, but you can do C. C backslash, and then specify your path. So whichever folder you want to go into, make it simple. Maybe you want to do it under the C drive, so you probably don't need to worry about all of this. So for you, I would specify the C drive, so C colon again, and that's it. So you don't need all of this. So you need C:\\/ and then the file that you want to create. So it'll be C:\\/ names.txt for you, just to keep it simple under the drive letter, so you know that you can go back and delete it or whatever you want to do with that file. So yeah, C drive / names.txt in the write mode. So this is the path. So you specify the path C drive names.txt. For me, I specify the K drive directory python _ example directory yt, and then the file name names.txt. So the file name, and then the extension txt. So in between those two, there's going to be a dot. So when you specify a file to be created, make sure to give it a name, right? So I gave my file name names, put a dot, and then include the extension. So it could be a txt, it could be a C++ source file, it could be a Python file, it can be any other file that can be opened with a notepad. So just keep that in mind. It doesn't have to be txt all the time. It can be some other file extension. It can be anything, as long as it can be opened in Notepad. It can be a .dat, short for data, as well. And that can be opened in Notepad as well. So yeah, file name dot extension. Make sure to put the extension. Don't forget about the extension. So where the source code is located, unless you specify a path. So now we go back to the one character that I skipped over. The R character, or the prefix R that prefixes the string, in which case this string represents the path. This R represents raw string. So when I precede the string with R, that means the following string will be raw. So that means since I preceded it with an R, I didn't have to put in a backslash again here. So I didn't have to put another backslash, another backslash, another backslash. So if I didn't have the R, I would need to put in the backslash twice, because when you put in a backslash initially, it thinks that the next character after the backslash is an escape sequence. So right now this is considered an escape sequence, just like the backslash in. The backslash in represents new line. So up here, in order to put in a literal backslash, I would need to put in a backslash twice, because the first backslash and then the next backslash means that I am literally putting in a backslash, because it thinks that this first backslash is part of a escape sequence, just like this one down here. So another way to prevent putting in two backslashes is to just put in the raw string, or the R. So it reads the following string as raw. So you don't have to put in two backslashes. Alright? So that's why I preceded with an R. So backslash is not seen as an escape sequence. Yeah, so that's what I talked about. And finally, my last concept of file input and output. Closing the file disconnects the program. So down here, I close the file. Close the file disconnects the program from the file. Any data that is in the buffer will be written to a file or on a disk. So what happens here is I open the file, assign it to the variable, and then I write the string to the file, and then I close the file. When I write these three strings, so I'm writing Leslie \n, Gray \n, and then Yenny \n, these three strings are actually written to the buffer. The buffer is analogous to your mailbox. The buffer is analogous to your mailbox. And so the post office brings the mail to the mailbox. Well, I think initially they try to bring it to your front door, right? And if you're not home, if you're not home when the data arrives, then they put the mail inside of your mailbox. So the mailbox is just like a short-term storage area, temporary storage area for the data. So going back to the buffer, when I write these strings out, I'm putting it inside of the mailbox, analogously, or the buffer, right? And so if I put it inside of the buffer, that means when I'm putting data inside the buffer until it fills up to its limit inside the buffer, when it fills up to the limit before I close, then all of its data goes to the file or to the house, or the other way around, to the post office. So if you send your mail out to the mailbox, that's the buffer, and then once your mail is filled up, then the post office comes out and brings it, and then puts it inside of the post office. So mailbox, buffer, post office is the file. So it's just more efficient if the program which automatically does this, it writes it to the buffer first until it's filled up to its maximum, and then it dumps everything that's filled up in the buffer to where it needs to be stored on the hard drive. So, because the hard drive the hard drive is actually farther away from the CPU, and so instead of storing it to the hard drive directly, which will slow down your motherboard processing, it will store it on the buffer. And the buffer, I actually don't know where the buffer is on the motherboard, but I'm pretty sure it's not on the hard drive. It's within the motherboard somewhere, but I can't remember. But it's more efficient, so it writes to the buffer and then to the hard drive once the buffer is full. So down here, if your buffer isn't full, is partially filled, and you close the file, the rest of the data that's stored inside of the buffer will be moved to your hard drive. So that's why it's important to close your file when you're done. So you open the file, process it, and then close, so you can send the rest of the data that's on the buffer to the hard drive, or whichever storage device you might have. So it might be a flash drive, I don't know. And that's it. So that's the concept of file input and output. That's what we learned today. Now, back to the source code, which I kind of touched on a little bit. In the source code, we define main. So you've seen this a lot. So def, keyword, name of the function, parentheses, passing nothing, colon, and then I define everything under the main function. Down here, I'll call the main function main to run what's inside of the definition. And so inside of here, I use the open built-in Python function, and I pass to the open built-in Python function two strings. The first string represents where the file is located, or where I want to create the file. So I've talked about the directory. I talked about the raw string right here, so that you don't have to put in two backslashes. So that's why the R is there, preceding. And so no two backslashes. So this is the directory. So drive, directory, and then file extension. This is where I want to write the file. If it exists, it'll overwrite. If it doesn't exist, then it'll just create the file under the directory YT using the W mode. And so for the second string, it represents the mode of the file. So the mode of the file is, I'm using write mode for today. I will show the other modes later on, or the next tutorial, but today I'll just show the write mode. So I'm using write mode. So here I'm saying object.inherited method write. And I don't think we talked about object-oriented programming. This is the following. What you see is object-oriented programming, and that's not till way later on. So So what I will say is I will give a little introduction to object-oriented programming, but I won't go into it into great detail until later on. So essentially, I create the file object, assign it to out file, and when I create that file object, which represents the names.txt up here, right? The file object represents the names.txt. Down here, I have file object dot inherited method write. So I'm using the method write, which is the action of the object. So I'm using the object's action or the method, and then I'm passing to that method, which is some people might call it a function. You can think of this as a function as well, but they call it a method because it's under an object. So under the object. And then I pass to it a string to this method or function. I pass it a string of Leslie new line, and then again I do it again, and then again I pass in Yenny \n. The \n is the escape sequence going to the new line. So just remember that you create the file object and then just use the write method and then path what you want to write to the file, and that's it. So the object-oriented programming I will go over later on in another tutorial. So, and then finally we have the object from up here, object dot inherited method close. It'll close out of the file. So we open the file, we process the file, and then we close the file. So again, I gave a reason why you need to close the file, so you can flush out the buffer, so there's nothing left in the buffer. Just remember to just open, process, and close. That's it. So you probably don't even need to remember about the buffer, but it's good to know. And down here, we call the main function because we defined it and then we call it, so it's calling the main function. So if we were to run the program, so run module, and if there's no error, yeah, so it runs a module. If I minimize this, and then open up your directory wherever it is. I think it's under your C drive, right? Under the C drive, so just look under the C drive. So if I look under my directory, I created the file here under the file names. So if we were to open the file that I just created from this program, you can see the output Leslie, Gray, and Yenny, but you do not see the \n. And the reason why that is because the \n represents new line. It represents going to the new line. So when I output this, Leslie, it sees the \n and says, oh, I gotta go to the new line Gray, new line Yenny, and then for the last one, it has a \n escape sequence, so it goes to the new line. As you can see, there's a blank line down here. The cursor, the blinking cursor here is at the last line because I specified an escape sequence up here to go to the new line, which is good. You want to do that, so everything wouldn't be on the same line. If I didn't have the \n, everything would be on the same line. So if I didn't have the \n, again, it will all be together. And what will happen is, since the file is, there's the same file in the same directory, it'll overwrite it. So overwrite the file. So down here, it overwrites the file, and then you get this, all in the same line. So that's why I put in \n to put it on their own line, so you can see the output. So the output, and I think that's it, unless I missed something. So yeah, that's writing to the file. I will discuss the read file, the read operation, or the read mode, and then the append mode in the next tutorial. Object-oriented programming, I discussed that as well a little bit, but not extensively. I will discuss that later on. So in another tutorial way later on. So don't worry about it. Just remember to do your process with the write function, which is the only one that we know. or the write method, and then close with the close method here. So today we discussed the concepts, everything about the concepts that I just discussed, and what the source code does, what it needs to do. So open, processing, and then close. And the open function, remember to precede it with the R so you don't have to put in 2 backslashes for the file in between the directories and the drive. You can also, before you go, you can also just specify the name of the file. So if you said open function and you specify the string that is just the name of the file, what will happen is it'll do the same process, but it'll create the file names.txt under the same directory where the source code, this one yt.py, is located. So if I ran this, it will overwrite names because it's going to try to write the file in the same directory where my source code is. So if I were to run this, it'll just overwrite everything in the same directory as my source code. So it'll write here at my source code. So that's the default. If you don't specify the directory path or the path, you just specify the name, the file name extension, the file will be located where the source code is located. So, and that's it. So I'll see you in the next tutorial.